Welcome everyone to the Future of Memory. I'm going to start by introducing the roundtable panelists and my co-author and myself, and Jimmy will take over. So this is a combined roundtable discussion and a book presentation. We'll have 20 minutes of discussion with our participants, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. So I'm going to start by introducing Ashley. Ashley Bluer is an archivist, educator, software engineer. She's an expert in building video analysis tools and pipelines. She specializes in video and audio formats, digital preservation, systems and workflows, and community support and solutions, and also teaching of technical concepts at all levels. She is the author of the Illustrated Guide to Video Formats, which came out in 2022. And Ashley is also a member of the Seller Standardizing Initiative, which is standardizing FFP1, a video compression codec, and Matroska, the container. Sitting next to me is Marion Jax. Marion is a digital archivist at the Österreichische Mediathek. That's the Austrian National Sound and Video Archive in Vienna. Before she moved on to the field of digital preservation, Marion specialized in the preservation of the digitization of analog video at the Mediathek for more than a decade. And her background includes an MA in history from the University of Vienna, and she also has qualifications in library and information studies at the Austrian National Library. Steve Lhomme works on the VLC media player, ubiquitous, known to all of us. He's a developer, and among his contributions to open source technology is the development of the container format Matroska, which is one of the four main protagonists of our book. My esteemed co-author, Jimmy Jones, is an archivist at the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning and an adjunct instructor at the School of Information Sciences, both at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My name is Marek Jancovic. I'm a media historian at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. I'm obsessed with the history of video formats, with the idea of formats, and also with the history of film and video as a physical thing. So thanks everyone for being here. Just a note on the title of the panel. So the future of memory is a phrase that appears somewhere in the promotional documents for Performa, which was this large format standardization initiative that was happening about a decade ago. I think No Time to Waste is also taken from one of the Performa workshops. And we thought the future of memory sounds so pompous and overbearing that we just had to borrow that as the title of our book. So with that, I hand over to Jimmy, who can tell you more about the project.
Thank you, Marek. Thanks for the introductions. I'm glad you did the introductions because I would have completely butchered the name of your institution, Marek. I would not have pronounced it well. So Marek and I are here in support of an upcoming book called The Future of Memory. The book is going to be published and released by the University of Illinois Press as part of their history of media and communications. I do have a brief elevator pitch about the book that I'm going to read for you.
A tiny bit.
So, drawing on numerous, I'm not sure what I can do. Let me see if I can move the mic a little closer. Tell me, just feel free to interrupt if I'm breaking up.
Yep.
Drawing on numerous interviews with preservation experts and standards developers, this book reveals the complex social dynamics of creating and implementing archival format standards. This is a history of a pivotal decade in audiovisual preservation, a field undergoing a tremendous transition. It chronicles how archivists navigate digital technology's promises and constraints amid industry-driven standardizations and emerging open source alternatives. It shows the audiovisual archive as a messy, dynamic space where people frequently disagree, where machines often fail, but where different communities also collaboratively develop resourceful solutions to unexpected problems. One of the things that we focus on is the Seller working group. A lot of people from Seller are undoubtedly here today, that has developed FFV1 and Matroska into formalized standards. For many years, we have been following and documenting how these wild formats became accepted by such august institutions as the Library of Congress. This is a watershed moment for archives which have never had much influence on the development of the formats that enter their collections until now. This book began as a merging of two dissertations, both mine and Merrick's. For me, it represents about a decade of work. The idea for the work on my part started while I was working at the Library of Congress about a dozen years ago. We had a FADGI meeting. We were talking about MXF and JPEG 2000 and the standardization of it we were doing. And Dave Rice opined briefly, hey, why aren't we using Matroska? Why aren't you considering Matroska for this work? And that just kind of got a little, just kind of dug in a little bit in my brain and left a little worm there. And I had to explore that later. Why aren't we using Matroska? Merrick comes to this work from a more of a media theory perspective, and I'm coming from more of a library science perspective. And we found, I think, a really nice merging of the two to explore this interesting time. We conducted many interviews, like I said, for the book. I think a lot of our interviewees are here today, so I wanted to say thank you again for your participation in the work. And with that, I think we can dive into the questions for the panel, of which I think I have the first one. So we kind of thought about topics for this discussion, and the first one was the changing landscape of formats. One of the big themes of the book is the proliferation of open source standards like FFV1 and Matroska in European and American archives over the past decade. And I wonder if the panel can reflect a little on this significant change compared to the use of industry-developed standards like MXF and JPEG 2000 in the past.
Ashley.
Who's gonna talk?
Yeah, I know. You are.
Something that has been coming to mind when I was looking over these questions was mostly around how this is a format, obviously it's sort of designed by the people for Steve Lhomme's purposes only, and expanded out to have great use. And then the efforts by archivists to champion this format, I think also aligns really well with government funding, because the Performa project funded by the European Commission is what allowed us to kick off and start this work for several years. And then after recently last year, I was also working on a contract for the Library of Congress to investigate sustainability of around 40 different formats and how those may be assessed. And so lately I've been thinking about the role that like public funding has played in this versus private capitalist funding, which does not align with the future of memory. I had to stop there.
Hello. It's actually Matroska didn't start with me. It started with another guy who made a format before me, and I jumped on his project. So there was already some interest. As we discussed yesterday, there was also Og Vorbis, which is a really internet age format, which was designed by people on the internet, but mostly for streaming audio. But our idea was that OGG was not good enough for video, which proved right. And basically, so we started working together and gathering more people. It was just basically one web page with the design of a new format. And then the guy went to the army. I continued the work. He came back, we disagreed. So basically, it was just a collective effort from the very beginning. It's not just me. I just put some ideas, and actually the effort of bringing the project together and continuing until it's actually real. So yeah, from my background, I had absolutely no background media storage, whatever. I studied mostly audio and video compression, but nothing about format. So for me, it was very new. I would have never imagined it would be used in archives in the future. That was it was one of the features, like streaming, editing, and long-term archival, which in our idea, I think we wrote that in the original website, was it's designed to last for 10 years, which at the time, well, every 6 months there was a new format and everything. It was changing so fast. For us, 10 years was like forever. And it proved also that we did the design correctly so that it lasts, and every new generation of codec, mostly video, but even audio or HDR and video, etc., we were ready to use it. So yeah, for me, I can't tell you how much difference it makes, but from before, because I wasn't there before, and this is not even my world, but it was part of the design anyway.
I can bring you back to the year 2010 when the Austrian Mediathek adopted FFV1. I would say what changed definitely for us with the standardization is that we don't have to be afraid mentioning that we archive in FFV1. So when we adopted FFV1 at the year 2010, it was groundbreaking. It was controversial. It was terrifying because we got attacked on so many sides. And I think when I look back at these times now, then Hermann Lewitz was the head of the technical department, who was brave to take this decision. Peter Bobestinger was our programmer who consulted us and who actually had the idea to use FFV1. When it comes to Matroska, we didn't dare to use it because it was so controversial to use FFV1 then that we wanted to play it safe and not be torn apart, and we used FFV1. I say we were very close to be torn apart by the community. It was such a hard time because we did something else and we were loud about it. Peter and Hermann went to many conferences and talked about the decision, and I think some parts of it were naivete, like being naive and presenting a solution and actually thinking that the community would be, oh great, you have a solution for us. And the community was very cruel to us, to be honest, most of them. So, yeah, I think it's great how it came out. I think it shaped our archiving experience very much. And I think it's a story of what happens if you dare not to adhere to a standard and to go rogue and do something else. So, yeah.
I'd like to add on the naivety, yeah. Naive. Yeah, that's also our whole state of mind from the beginning, like we're just some people working together, creating a format. Like we had no idea if people would use it, and it kept growing step by step. There was no master plan. We just did our thing, and I mean, with no goal, or I mean, just basically it was for us to have something good that we considered good for us, and yeah. So basically, the whole idea was that anybody can use it, but without knowing how, and people would just come to us. We never knew when or why, and I mean, that was the whole spirit.
I just wanted to mention, clarify something because I said out of desperation. So I would clarify that our initial plan was to do JPEG 2000 in MXF, which we could not replay on our machines, and we didn't dare to do that. So it was a state of desperation, and we had some money to digitize 2,000 videos, and we had a time frame of 2 years. So what to do now? And FFV1 was the solution then.
A large part of the book documents precisely this project or this process of how and why formats that were 10 or 15 years ago associated mostly with piracy, in the case of the container Matroska, or were completely unknown as encoders in the case of FFV1, were also very strongly attacked. There was a lot of suspicion surrounding these two technologies. How do those types of technologies over time become accepted, right? What are the factors for, making them acceptable and eventually also recommended, right? Such as in the last year's Library of Congress recommendation, where FFV1 and Matroska as a combination finally ended up being recommended for moving image preservation. So it's a very interesting social process. It sounds like it's a largely technological question, but it actually involves a lot of politics, a lot of ethical decisions as well. And the Austrian Mediathek plays a large role. Actually, our introduction starts with the first public presentation by the Austrian Mediathek, in which FFV1 was presented as a potential archival format. Jimmy, I think you have a few more questions.
I do, yeah. I want to ask about the place of compression in the archives. One of the themes of the book is losslessness, lossless compression, and the place for notions of losslessness in the archives. Do you think, this is to anyone on the panel, will compression remain important to archives as computer processors get more powerful and storage space becomes cheaper and more plentiful?
Should I take it? I'd say yes, because the storage space we need is ever growing, even if it's get cheaper or stock is expanding. And I think compression depends on what you're talking about. Like today I talked about our Born digital collection, who is compressed, and about preserving it the way they are, which makes sense. But when we produce our files and we digitize our analog material, FFV1 is the one thing to go. I wouldn't think of using anything else or going to uncompressed.
Ashley, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult, complicated question. I think because formats are so difficult and complicated, we're constantly changing. We think about like social media, integration of those kinds of formats, other web formats, the complexity and largeness of different kinds of formats that we've all talked about over the past 8 years at no time to wait. I think it's no. And then the creation of access copies is always going to require something that's lighter, easier, lower latency, better for streaming. And so I think that we do have to be equipped to understand all of these different types of formats. And that is another panel and book and conference as well.
Thank you. Steve, you probably also have a lot of insight from a different perspective as, someone who works on VLC.
Actually, from the Matroska person, I designed the format, well, not just me, but the format is designed so that it's codec agnostic. So no matter the codec, it was the same. And all the tools, Matroska tools that have been designed are in that, designed that way so that you don't need to know which codec is inside. It doesn't matter. But on the container, it's opaque. So from the container, it doesn't matter if it's compressed or not. All we need, actually, some of the work that's been done because of the archival and, for example, uncompressed, was making sure all the fields that are usually inside usual codecs, like the colorimetry and things like that, that were not in Matroska, were added back, or the number of bits for if it's RGB, YUV, etc. They were not originally in Matroska because people were not using uncompressed. They were using a codec that have all the information. So we had to have the information in the container for codecs that don't have it. But that's pretty much the separation. Otherwise, the codec doesn't really matter. And that's one of the difference actually with OG, which OG is designed to be really tied to each codec. So every time you add the codec, you would have to know how to map things. If you have something that understands OG, you cannot read any codec. You have to exactly know how it works. So that, and knowing that at the time, that's how we make sure that the separation is absolute between the two.
I have one topic that I would like to ask about, and that's the question of gender and standardization. So the Internet Engineering Task Force is praised and respected for its openness, for the openness of its standardization process. But in recent academic literature, there's also increasingly critical voices about its institutional culture, which can be abrasive and hostile to women. And even though our interviews were not particularly designed to elicit responses about gender, this is actually also something that occasionally popped up in the interviews. So I would like to ask, well, Marion and Ashley in particular, if you can touch upon the role that gender plays in standards making, but also in archival technology more broadly. Marion, would you like to start?
I cannot talk about standards making or the IATF, so I can generally talk about my experience working in the archiving field as a woman and always in tech from the start on. One conclusion is that it gets much, much easier when you get older. So this helps a lot, and being known in a community, this helps also a lot, and standing for something and having opinions. But I still experience that it's, how to say it, it's often with external people that they do not expect a woman to be the person with technical knowledge and to be the person to talk to. So I still get that sometimes, and I have my strategies to do that. So you have to say some clever words and make sure, talk to me, and it's not my male colleague who's working for press or public relations that you should talk to. Yeah, but I think it's slowly changing. I think there is a generational gap. Most experience I had are with older technicians from the rather production field. Yeah, but I love to see that there's more and more women coming in the field, and to always see great, strong women talking at conferences like that.
Thank you. Ashley.
Yeah, I am a software developer by trade. I also identify and present as a woman, femme, presenting person. And so obviously I've experienced tons of discrimination across the board. I'd say that I think some of the obstacles with the standards development in general is, well, one, it is like, I think a generational difference a little bit. I think that maybe we will be seeing some changes in the future, but we've also been saying that for like 100 years at this point. But I do think a lot of the people that are allowed to work on standards are people that have already reached a high tenure within a private organization and then have been like sort of allowed to do that work. So you think about like the pipeline or the funnel getting more and more narrow, and then only when you're at a more staff or senior level you're able to spend time dedicated to doing that. And we don't, I think, have enough of a anything to allow diversity there in any capacity, gender or any other sort of layers of diversity. And so, I mean, I'm not coming here with solutions. I can only come here with complaints. But it is something I've noticed, but it's something I've noticed in all aspects of my life. And then even at the first No Time to Wait, someone came up to me and said he wanted to speak to the developers. And what he meant was he wanted to speak to Dave, who, as at the time, and I'm sure now, I think also does not identify as somebody who is a developer or a programmer, identifies as an archivist or a technologist. And I'm someone that was and is actively working as a developer. And so he just sort of saw me as like the admin girl rather than someone to take seriously. And so it happens constantly. It's a big problem. And I think that I don't know what I
Okay.
Ashley, I'm afraid we lost
don't know
you.
what I think.
That was
Sorry.
I can tell.
Ashley, we lost you for a moment. Would you mind repeating the last couple of sentences? I think the connection might be unstable. Oh no.
Oh no. Okay.
Sorry, everyone on the panel. If you can hear me, we've just
Okay.
lost you for a second, and we need to beam you up on the screen again.
Or she can repeat while they are working.
Ashley, we didn't hear the last couple of sentences.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I just sort of rambled out, so you didn't miss anything after that point. I said I don't have any like deep knowledge or solutions on this, but it is still a problem.
Right, so what I'm hearing both of you say is there have been small incremental improvements, but overall barriers to women and the way women are seen in archival technology as well as in standardization are still very much there.
Might I add something? I think that there's in archives, often there's this strong tradition that men take care of the technical stuff and women describe it in the metadata. And I think that institutions change slowly, and this bias is like what you still see everywhere. I don't have a solution, but I have a request, and this is especially meant to other colleagues, just to be mindful. I'm thinking about my colleagues who could say, "I'm not the person you should talk to. She's the expert on my side." Or what I often feel is like it's so nice to be the center of attention that it's hard for people to say to help a woman on the side to enter the conversation and make it clear. So I think it's a request to be mindful and look at these things, because it's often I feel of a lack of thought.
Thank you. Ashley, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I agree with everything Marian said.
Thank you. There is one more issue that I want to touch upon, and this is not something that we can really address in this particular panel, but it's also something that popped up throughout the research for our book. We spoke to a small handful of archivists in African countries as well, Malawi, Ghana, Nigeria. Not many, but a few. And for many of them, the common recommendations of the FIAF of IASA are just technologically and infrastructurally completely out of reach. Some of them, in fact, explicitly view archival standards as extensions of colonial relationships. So I wrote down a few questions on my paper, but I realize that these are rhetorical questions because it's not something that we can answer here, but I want to put it out there anyway. You know, how do we make video preservation standardization inclusive, but also realistic and sustainable in terms of technical specifications, so resolutions, bit depths, but also in terms of personnel, technological and infrastructural requirements? And also, how do we reach communities that don't have the technical or knowledge resources to adopt particular standards or to participate in the standardization process itself? Again, if any of you have ideas, please feel free to voice them, but I'm not asking you to come up with solutions here on the spot.
Why are you looking at us?
Marion?
Just a few thoughts. I think it's coming from an archive who started off with video not adhering to a standard. Yes, this can be a lot of pressure, but I think it's a lot about it's okay to be diverse, and it's okay to give to assume that an archive does the best in its circumstances and not condemning others. I think it can be a lot of pressure if you cannot afford to adhere to a standard or to have a large storage space to store those things. So I think it's about being open, and we all do our best, and it often means doing our best in the circumstances and with the resources that we have.
I do have one idea or point, is that we always try to make Matroska completely free. Nobody has ever paid for Matroska. And the fact that it's on IETF, which is available completely for free compared to ISO or whatever format, that even like the C language is an ISO. So every programmer in C in the world who doesn't have a company can buy ISO documents, is using a draft, and basically the draft has become the de facto standard because nobody can afford the real document. So maybe there was some changes between that draft and the real standard, but most people don't know. So yeah, for us, it's really important that all the specifications are free. Maybe there could be also a language barrier because everything is done in English. For most programmers, it's not such a problem because it's all programming language, modern ones are in English, but like reading specifications in English can also be a barrier. But I don't know if the IETF has some initiative for that to translate the documents when they're settled. I don't think so.
Thank you. Jimmy, do you have any points?
Not off the top of my head. This was a really interesting kind of revelation through the course of our research. You know, my research was so American focused, perhaps understandably. Merrick, I think you're coming more from a European perspective. And I think one of the things we point out in the book is this is definitely an avenue for more exploration. This notion of potentially standards as colonizing technologies. I think there's work to be done there, both scholarly work and then also like repairing that kind of relationship going forward in the future. Steve's point is really well taken. You know, the openness of standards means that the potential openness of standards, particularly the seller standards, means that in theory anyone can decode them. That again is another kind of vein through the work, which is the hand-me-down standards that we have worked with from broadcast in the past have been very closed off, black boxed, and perhaps the openness of the seller standards will help to ameliorate this problem a bit of standards as colonizing technologies. That's our hope anyway. But I strongly think there's more work to be done in that scholarship, just like the earlier conversation about gender and standards development, adoption and archives. Definitely more work should be done there.
With that,
Yeah,
I would like to, oh, sorry, apologies. Ashley, please.
I was saying that, so I think what everyone is sort of speaking about here is I think that Stellar has done so much work in opening up flexibility around standards. Like Marion was discussing earlier, how it was very controversial to do this adoption 14 years ago. And I think along with adopting these kinds of formats, just allowing for the existence of other formats to be deemed a standard, along with the increase of community archives or like pirate archives, I think allows sort of archiving to be seen in a more flexible and nuanced way. And I think archivists sometimes bristle at that because they want the best quality, et cetera, or you're not doing it right. But I think we've also seen a lot more growth and flexibility around that, and hopefully we continue to. And I think by having it be like there's not just one way to do media preservation, that can allow for more voices to be doing this work, involved in this work, and like documenting this work and coming up with their own ideas and empowering other people to do so, rather than it has to only come from one organization or company.
Thank you, Ashley. With that, I would like to invite everyone in the audience to, join the discussion, reflect on the last decade of standardization, but also maybe think about this question whether open source standardization can be a model for future formats or encodings or other technologies that are needed by archivists and preservation professionals. Peter, you had a question.
Hi, Peter Westinger. May I, for the thing how we could decolonize things, I think what we've seen here is that open software, open hardware, open licenses, and so we have all these tools and solutions being paid for, and then everyone can use them. And my experience is that if I use, for example, a Linux operating system, I can use hardware that is way older, like 15 years plus. So I also used to work in countries with people where there really was, I don't know if I may say third world or whatever, but the thing is that they say, thank you very much, because now we can use your tools. And we're not stealing them and want to borrow them, it's not freeware. We actually have the real thing, and we can now collaborate on the same eye level, and we can use the hardware that we have access to. And this does not only apply to standards, but I see a real benefit there. And also with the art community, and these days, Arduino, Raspberry Pi, so I think there's a pattern there. And I think it has really great potential also for us in the Western world, because I don't want to have to use a Mac. I'd rather use a Linux machine to ingest video. It's also cheaper and more stable for us. Yeah.
Thank you.
I would bring a point that was discussed just before about standards, and I would give an additional perspective about the recommendation that, for instance, in bodies like FIAF do give, and they are so high that only a few people can accept that. And it's very important to lower these expectations too, because the 99% of the archives worldwide cannot afford other things than a scanner with a buyer sensor. And they cannot continue to say that the buyer sensor gives a bad result. They cannot continue to say that you need 4K for 35 millimeter. And it goes exactly to the discussion you had before, that the expectation has to be lowered to a realistic level that can be applied in the long term and on all levels, not only on standards.
But isn't it finally the idea of a standard to describe some kind of an ideal? And then it is kind of okay, more or less clear that nobody will ever reach that ideal to the fullest. And it's not only archives in Africa who cannot, as Reto just said, really implement these standards. Everybody makes some compromises. That's a global thing. I think that's not something limited to developing countries also.
I completely see that point, but I also think that perhaps energy consumption and environmental responsibility are ideals too that could be embedded in standards making. That's just my input. I'm wondering, at the Austrian Mediathek, do you grapple with this idea of, when is enough? How far do we go with resolutions, with bit depths? Are we going to keep increasing them? Is that something that pops up in your work?
I would say not to that point. But I think where this gets important to be realistic is in the pressures of digitizing our analog collection. So we know that time is passing by, and it's already very hard to get good recorders and replacements, and to find companies that still repairs your recorder. So I think what I often said is that I prefer that instead of doing a tape for the 6th time, I prefer to do another one and preserving another one, which might not be the absolute best copy, but I managed to preserve another item of our collection. And this is in a race where we all definitely know that we are going to be able to save everything that we have in our collection. So I think we really have to think about the whole collection and trying to get as much as possible to the digital world. So that's why I think we have to do compromises.
Ashley, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this. Sorry, no, not just, good enough preservation rather than best practices?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% believe in good enough preservation. I think I wrote sort of good enough practices and not just expecting that everything has to be done in this perfect way. So I hope that, and I've seen a lot of changes across different institutions just in America around accepting formats that are not perfect. And I think that I've seen a lot of reduction in bullying around this at archival conferences, but I don't know if that is bias on my part because I am older and not maybe roped into talking to people that are going to do that kind of bullying to me about oh my God, you're not using blah, blah, blah and using XYZ. They kind of know better for me personally, but I also hope that that is the case for people that are younger generations coming in, and that they are a little more radical and coming from the approach of a more community-centered form of archiving. I've seen that change. I just hope that change is true. I can only see that through my own lens, biased lens.
Thank you. We have more input from the audience.
Question from the live stream. Sum it up. Is a standard if it's not a global standard? Is there a point to push for regulation?
Is this a question to anyone in particular?
No.
Is there anyone who would like to take this one?
I think it was at the first No Time to Wait that it was said that a standard is only something that people agree on. It doesn't have to be, say, standard on a document to become a standard. And basically, Matroska I mean, we cleaned up the document to make an actual standard in the IETF sense. But it's already a standard because people use it the way it's supposed to be. So it's already a de facto standard. And as we discussed earlier, it's being adopted in a lot more programs. Even like yesterday, we talked about DaVinci, about Apple supporting WebM, things like that. Like even if it's not an ISO or whatever standard, or the IETF document is not finalized, I would consider it's already a standard because people agree together to just use it.
I think we're actually seeing a lot of international institutions adopting to a new reality, and that's a multi-standard reality. I think the era where the entire world could rely on the ISO or the MPEG to dictate what's going to happen is over. Partly that has to do with political developments, with a shift to a sort of nationalist technopolitics. But yeah, institutions like the EBU are also adjusting to the fact that there are regions of the world and specific countries that are just going to insist on developing their own standards, or that large tech companies don't like standardization anymore. They're just going to do what they want to do because they are large enough and their user base is enormous. But also there's communities of practice like archivists who are not served by those standards, and they are going to start developing their standards too, like we see with Seller. I mean, that's the perfect example of that. So I think this multi-standard world is increasingly becoming a reality. That's just my view on that. I think that might be almost all of the time we have. Are there any other questions or comments? Anything you'd like to add? Yes, Peter.
Before you were asking, like, what was the tipping point for acceptance of FFV1 in the community? And Marion said it was really ugly, and it was really ugly and hurtful at the beginning. It was money. From my point of view, I was like rappelling at trees, I was begging, I was crying, I don't know. And they were like, we're not going to touch it. The other archivists were like, we're not going to touch it. And then Indiana University, no one ever contacted us at the Mediathek, no one asked me anything, but they threw in money. And from that point on, it was, and then they were like, ooh, someone believes in this with money. And then the people who ridiculed us 2 years before, yeah, go play with the other kids. Industry knows what they're doing. They're like, we always know it. It really was, that was a major tipping point. And the Performer project, but the Performer project alone was not it, but that was about at the same time.
Thank you.
And then the rest is, oh, now they're using it, and waterfall effect, and it's thank you.
You're so right. And I just wanted to add something. Money, also from another perspective, that FFV1, I think got a lot of drive when it entered the film community with the promise of the reduction of storage costs. So I think money also played a part in that.
Thank you, everyone. Ashley, Jimmy, Marion, Steve, thanks so much for joining the discussion.
Thank you all.
Thank you.